The difficulty with trying to answer a comment on Eyes Wide Shut is that every time I attempt to answer it triggers another question with regard to the movie. In the case of the comment about whether I should show the footage that I was discussing in my third eye opening and Eyes Wide Shut video, raised the question for me about whether it's possible to actually duplicate the viewing experience that led to my previous video. It's a difference between seeing versus looking. The act of simply showing you the final result of my search through the video would undercut the process and the experience of how I got to that point. I put my VHS player on pause and then hit the slow button one frame at a time, advanced one frame at a time, and I eventually found the overlap of images that I discussed in the video that looked like there was a third eye because of Tom Cruise's character's eye being put over top of the model's two eyes. But that, to simply talk about that, it's not the same as showing it, I know, but I thought that if I were to just show the image, that would undermine the basic experience and the thing you can learn most from Eyes Wide Shut, I think, which is to go out and do your own research, make your own evaluation of the film, and come to your own conclusions. And that is the way of partly opening up your perception and not being so eyes wide shut. If I were to simply just hand out the image, and it would seem to me that would undercut in some ways what I would try to accomplish with the movie. But that, for me, opened up a whole new set of questions about how we look at the movie. The most basic one being, how do you define the phrase eyes wide shut? What does it mean in the context of the movie? I would have thought that all the ground would have been covered with this, and I found several answers in various places, but a lot of them were not discussed at all. The first one is, of course, to stop investigating, to not go and look for the original footage yourself and go have the experience of looking for that one frame where the two other pictures overlap. That's a form of having your eyes wide shut, just not looking anymore, and taking someone else's word for it, or taking someone else's subjective interpretation that you might not agree with your own, or not being able to duplicate the original playing of the video, because each time you try to play it, especially with different equipment, the image will look slightly different depending on the equipment you use. It's also, I think, Eyes Wide Shut is a way of looking at the basic experience of watching television or film. When people watch TV, their eyes will stop blinking. The frequency of their blinks will get farther and farther apart until eventually their eyes really are wide. But they might not be fully understanding what's going on, because television also has a hypnotic effect, and it can kind of lull the viewer into not perceiving everything and thinking about everything that is shown. And the problem with images and metaphors that have to do with seeing, with individuality, with eyes, with knowledge, and with things which resemble eyes, is that these things are so deeply embedded into our language and our experience, especially when we are such a visual culture, that we will tend to just miss most of them and not think about their meaning, because we automatically use them without thinking about what they mean anymore. And that could be one of the biggest meanings of the movie, is to have all these references just thrown past you and not be able to absorb them all, then functioning like your eyes are wide shut. Another, there's a whole series of these references in the movie, and every time Dr. Bill Harford meets another woman who's some resemblance to his wife on his Odyssey, or meets a character that pushes him in a new direction along the trip that he takes, he has another instance of some sort of eyes wide shut metaphor. So they're all along, they're like milestones on his journey. The first one is right in the first opening lines of the movie. He asks his wife if she has seen his wallet, and she replies by asking him how she looks. These are both keys to identity, and this is one of the ways the phrase is used in the movie. Perhaps it's a pun between eyes, your visual organs, and I, your sense of individual self, your identity, or a particular individual who is encountered in the movie. Bill's identity has to do with his being a doctor, his identity card, and his money. He values himself according to these two things, which he flashes and throws around throughout the film. Alice values herself according to her looks. And she's always in front of a mirror and being complimented by people on her looks, as if they instinctively know that it's important for her to be complimented that way. Bill is fairly stingy in terms of compliments this way. He answers her first he answers her without looking, because you always look good, he says. And then he turns around and looks at her and says, yes, you look good. But after that, after she has told him where his wallet is, and he has verified that she's good looking, they've both supported their respective weak self-images, then she takes off her glasses that she used to look at herself in the mirror with, puts them aside and goes out. So this is another possible type of having your eyes wide shut, needing glasses to see and then avoiding using them in order to look good in front of other people. On their way to the party then, they go to a setting where they have to be seen by other people, and the first thing they do is they walk in and people say, how good it is to see you. Good to see you again. And then it goes, and you look stunning. So we have all these instances again, and the women compare each other's outfits and how they look. And Ziegler compliments on his tennis arm, which is now so good. And the thing we saw in the opening scene was 2 tennis rackets where Nicole Kidman's character is stripping, raising the question of who she's been playing tennis with. But they have another exchange, casual exchange, and all these references have to do with vision and seeing. And whether you really see the person, because most of these people are people that the Harfords don't know. They've never met. So they're looking at them, but they don't have a clue who they are. In that respect, their eyes are wide shut once again. Bill is then approached by a couple of models who walk with him down the hallway. One says that he helped her once because she had something in her eye. So you need to blink and keep your eye open to get an object out of it. So it's wide, but you're probably not taking in your surroundings very much because you're worried about getting the thing out of your eye. So that's another instance of possibly having something like an eye wide shut. The model who has that taken out of her eye then comments on how doctors are very knowledgeable. She says this in a flirtatious way, hinting that it's possibly a biblical reference, the knowledge in the biblical sense, and this is hinted at other times in the movie as well, the Adam and Eve story. But she also says that doctors work too hard and they probably miss a lot. And there you have the essence of the title. This is very much ingrained in the doctor's character. He looks at a lot of things, he knows a lot of things, and yet he misses a lot of things. So in that respect, his eyes are both wide and shut. They're wide to some things, shut to others. The women make one of the first symbolic references, perhaps, to something discussed in another essay on the net, which is that the whole plot is a Kundalini awakening. And Bill goes through various aborted attempts to have sex, and the tension rises each time, and finally he has his Kundalini rising at the end. This is something which is alluded to, the essay says, everywhere in the movie, except in the orgy scene. Of course, I've found the exception in the orgy scene, where there seems to be a Kundalini reference in that there seems to be a third eye opening made from 2 overlapping images. The women then could represent snakes. One of them in particular has a very serpentine movement as she kind of slithers around Bill. And Bill would represent the spine, the 2 women would represent the snakes curling around the spinal column, or they could represent a symbolic representation of what it is to be a doctor, because it's the caduceus symbol, the staff with the 2 snakes twirling around it, and doctor in the middle being the staff. But the phenomenon of having eyes wide shut is in many ways a symbolic discussion of what it is to be a doctor. To look at naked bodies all day long, but not only for one specific purpose, and not understand them in another context. And even when you're in an orgy, you're still seeing them in some respect in a sort of clinical way. The orgy scenes aren't very sexy, and it's a little bit like a doctor's way of looking. After he gets away from the two models, he's called away from them, just as their flirtation's about to reach a critical point, apparently, and he's brought off to see up the stairs where most of the seduced people seem to go, and where Alice, his wife, is being tempted to go by her dance partner at that very moment, to look at a model or a prostitute who has taken an overdose of drugs while having sex with Ziegler. The first thing he says to her is, "Open your eyes." She could be said to have eyes wide shut because she has overdosed on a drug, and to be intoxicated in many ways is to have your eyes wide shut. She's probably seeing something in her mind's eye because Bill is talking to her, and she's probably imagining someone outside her field of vision, but her eyelids are still closed, and at that point she can't open them. This is also a reference to another Tom Cruise movie. It was originally entitled, in Spanish I believe, Open Your Eyes, but it was remade into Vanilla Sky. This is a movie in which Tom Cruise's character has himself cryogenically frozen and eventually finds a way to try to bring himself back to life and correct his physical defects caused by injury. Now in this movie, of course, which is made just after all the cloning announcements, people are walking around with eyes wide shut in a way because they aren't dealing with the fact that we could have a means of remaking someone after death, and the technologies aren't being made available. In that respect, everybody's being sacrificed. It's not just the model who Tom Cruise's character fails to save at the beginning, but everyone in a more generalized sense. Despite what Ziegler says at the end of the movie, life goes on till it doesn't, that's the way it is. Maybe not. So after Tom Cruise's character leaves his assignment, his medical assignment to look after the hooker, gets you to wake up, but doesn't really completely arrange for her to be taken care of in a way so that she'll survive. He goes back, and eventually he goes through his day as a doctor, and we see the two of them in scenes back and forth between the married couple. He looks at a patient, a young, good-looking patient with her top off, and possibly, most likely, examining her for breast cancer. So here we have the eyes wide shut phenomenon that Nicole Kidman's character later alludes to, in the way that he looks at women as physical objects as part of his job, but he doesn't think about what might be going on in their minds and what might be going on in her mind and how important that is to her. There are a lot of ironies in this, in that she fantasizes about a naval officer, and Odysseus, the Greek hero from the Odyssey, Homer's Odyssey, is someone who spends his time at sea. And these symbolically represented, or elements of his Odyssey, it's called a sexual Odyssey, are represented in the movie. So there are these hints and allusions back and forth between the Odyssey and what happens in Eyes Wide Shut. Odysseus is somebody with eyes wide shut who goes through some of the same sorts of things. He meets one woman at one point, Calypso, who wants to keep him with her and would keep him from aging and dying and allow him to be continually young and give him the ultimate medical treatment. And he has obstacles thrown in his way by the gods, by greater powers than himself, on his way back to see his wife after he's helped win the Trojan War. And he keeps fighting all of these and overcoming all these obstacles, even though at the end he's going back to meet his wife and to die. And so he's always ruled by his wife, even though the gods might be actually helping him in some ways by keeping him from getting back to her. So we have this discussion about the fantasy about the naval officer, which is especially ironic because Odysseus is somebody who spent all his time at sea trying to get back home. And he's also played by somebody, Dr. Bill Harford's character is played by somebody named Tom Cruise, and cruise is what you can do on the ocean. It's also what you need to help you man your ship. You need a crew. And Odysseus was very hard on his crew. He met a lot of monsters and kept putting them through all these ordeals so that they got killed off during the course of his adventures. So you had somebody who might need more than one cruise. So he, after that, is called away he has to go to the next link in his chain of events and his sexual odyssey. And he's called away to meet a grieving daughter whose father has just died. And here we see another couple of instances of the eyes wide shut phenomenon. One way to have your eyes wide shut is to be dead, as the man is in his apartment. Because you can die with your eyes physically open, but of course your brain's no longer working, you're no longer processing any visual imagery, therefore they might as well be shut. Another form of eyes wide shut is to confuse one way of having your eyes wide shut with another way of having your eyes wide shut, and that is what the daughter does. She's grieved, she's upset because she thought he was just asleep, namely seeing something, dreaming and seeing something in his mind's eye, thinking he was wide awake when in fact his eyes were shut. She confused that with physical death. And she also has another form of having her eyes wide shut. Love is blind, and she's infatuated with Dr. Bill. And partly out of the anxiety of the moment, she kisses him. This is another way people can have their eyes wide shut, because when kissing someone and being that close up to them, you can open your eyes, but you don't really see much, and it can be hard to focus. So having eyes wide open won't help a whole lot. There's also an allusion to comparison of the eyes with other orifices of the body. Something in the dictionary definition that looks like an eye can be called an eye. The eye of a needle, the eye of a hurricane, and so on. But there's also other things that open and shut are, for instance, the mouth. So Dr. Bill is called away, or he excuses himself from this meeting with the grieving daughter and goes out onto the street, where he's accosted by a part-time, at least, prostitute, who brings up another form of comparison between the eyes and other things that open and shut, and which are occurring throughout the movie, namely doors and sexual orifices. Domino, her name is, says to him, do you want to come inside with me? This is, of course, a double entendre, sexual in terms of entering through her door to get to where they can have sex, and entering her womb, essentially. Her room and her womb. So we have these reference between eyes and entrances and meeting new people and having sex. These things are interrelated to each other throughout the movie. There's also a strange juxtaposition that goes on, because Domino brings him into her room and doesn't act like a prostitute in every respect, in that us prostitutes typically will refuse to kiss patients on the mouth because it's too intimate, personal a thing. It's not a thing what you do with somebody that you're hiring to have sex with you. But she has quite a personal-looking kiss with Dr. Bill there. And that's another eyes wide shut situation, the kissing. Whether you open your eyes or close them doesn't really make a difference. There's also, on the way in, a strange switching of roles. One thing I've read in an interview, which I unfortunately can't reference, I don't remember where I originally read it, by a prostitute, said that she would always look for a way to compliment the client, to get the client in the mood when entering his place where he lived. The first thing she would want to say is that he was good looking. If he wasn't, he'd say that she liked his clothing. If he wasn't well dressed, she'd say, nice apartment. And here we have Dr. Bill doing this. He's acting in a little bit like a prostitute. He comes in the door, looks around, sees the place is a dump. It's tiny compared to where he's just been, and he says, nice tree. That's the only thing there that looks good that he can compliment. Now, he could, of course, compliment Domino. She's a very good-looking woman, but he doesn't do that. He's very reluctant to compliment women on their looks, even his own wife at the beginning of the movie, when she really wants someone to say that she's good-looking. And this might be because he's a form of prostitute and that he's paid to look at naked bodies. And he's like someone who doesn't want to give out. He's stingy with compliments in that regard. Doesn't want to tell women they're good looking because he might not get as much money for being paid to look at them as a doctor. So we have Dr. Bill called away again because his wife calls him, and he's interrupted in another in his many string of interruptions. And he goes out and eventually ends up talking to Nick Nightingale, his old buddy from medical school who dropped out and has become a piano player. But he tells about a special gig where he does an eyes wide shut thing. Nick plays blindfolded, so he could have his eyes wide open, but it wouldn't really matter a whole lot unless the blindfold is loose and he happens to peek a little bit out the side. And of course he tells Dr. Bill how to get to a certain party that he's going to be playing at later on. The password for this is Fidelio, which seems to be intended to be interpreted ironically, the opposite of the meaning that you would think from the description of the plot of the Beethoven opera, because the Beethoven opera is about a woman who disguises herself as a man and goes into a prison where her husband has been unlawfully imprisoned because he was looking to uncover corruption in the prison system. And she gets him out. When Dr. Bill goes to use the password given to him by Nick, possible reference to both Nick the Devil and Nick St. Nicholas, he is shown outside the costume shop with through bars. You see him through bars as if he's in prison. And you also look inward and see the proprietor coming out behind bars. So both of them are shown as if they're in prison. And this has to do with the plot of Fidelio. When the proprietor allows him into the shop, he takes him through another set of locked doors, suggestive of prison, and then he hears two guys messing around with his daughter. Threatens his, saying he's going to kill his daughter, locks them in and says it's a matter for the police. So, here we have the opposite, in this case, of Fidelio. Instead of a woman dressing up as a man to spring somebody from a prison, we have two men dressing up as women and getting locked up as if they were in prison. So the password that is given to Dr. Bill seems to be working in the opposite way that you would think. And this is another form of possibly eyes wide shut, is to misinterpret something when it has the opposite meaning from what you think it would. So we have, from there, Dr. Bell finally gets the costume he needs and engages in another form of having your eyes wide shut, because you can look directly at someone but not know who they are if they are in disguise and or masked in some way. And he goes to the party where everybody is a Fidelio. There's not just one, there's a whole gathering of people all using the password Fidelio and all dressed up as someone else, and there to engage in infidelities. So from it's the movie, or sorry, the opera turned inside out, because the opera was about love and justice. This is more about lust and injustice. That is, of course, one of the primary meanings, which other people have also already discussed, is to have your eyes wide shut, is to look at something and know it's wrong and pretend it isn't. So we have speaking ironically as a form of the eyes wide shut. We also have what happens after this is that, well, I guess I should discuss one more. He meets he has a kiss that's a shut kiss, more obviously this time, and that the people have the masks on so that they look at each other, they don't know who they are, and they also don't experience each other even by physically touching their mouths. Then he's led away, and he's approached by another model or series of models and prostitutes who say, "Are you enjoying yourself?" And here, in that respect, he is shut off, and he's not having intercourse with anyone, so their orifices are not being opened in that respect. But he says, "I've been having a very interesting look around." And once again, we have this allusion to his role, his habits as a doctor, which is to just look at naked bodies and not do anything with them, and not engage in the sort of fantasies that his wife is imagining, even as she dreams sleeping at home or as she's discussed with him before. So after this, of course, we have the confrontation scene in which he's told to take off his mask. And this is a reverse of Fidelio, the opera, we have only one person in disguise in that one, or looking for someone that she doesn't know. One unknown, one disguised. But here we have a whole gathering of people, all Fidelio, looking at one person being unmasked and being saved by someone having to die in his place. It is not justice, it's sacrifice. And the original Fidelio didn't have anyone who actually died in that context. So it seems once again as if the password is being used ironically and the whole thing is being turned inside out. After that, all the doors would end, the people and the orifices that were open to Dr. Bill become closed to him. He's thrown out, and when he goes back and tries to reinvestigate and re-meet all the people who got him there into that exclusive party, he can't track any of them down. A lot of them are associated with death in some way. There's a possible HIV positive result, and in the roommate of Domino that he goes back to find, he's told that Domino is HIV positive. The woman who sacrificed herself for him at the party turns up dead. Nick Nightingale is taken away and he can't be found again, and so on. So all these doors and these eyes, these individuals who were accessible to him before, are now shut off. And that is one of the dynamics of the movie. Initially everything's open to him, and then everything is shut. So he finally is summoned by Ziegler because he's been sticking his nose into many things. He's gone back to the party location, and the bars are closed, so he's shown as being in prison once again, whether he's outside or whether he's inside. Practically everybody in the movie is symbolically in prison. And Ziegler makes this big speech concluding with the words that life goes on until it doesn't, and that's just the way it is. And from there, he goes back and has the final speech with his wife. For it appears, much like Odysseus, he's gone back to his wife, and he might be going back to something more dangerous than he was experiencing when he went on his nighttime Odyssey. So those are some of the meanings of Eyes Wide Shut. And it seems to me the main thing you can gain from this is perhaps a little more knowledge of how we automatically build all these expressions, how we build the Garden of Eden story, which is alluded to when the Harfords talk after he says, "I'll tell you everything." These things of knowledge and eating from the wrong tree are built into the culture. We're going to have a better medical system and get access to some technology so that death isn't necessarily inevitable. We'd have to think about some of these things and realize how we've had them built into our culture and been manipulated by them. In other respects, looking for more and more knowledge is trying to know, in some ways, is an unproductive thing. I think that you're never going to have complete knowledge or your eyes opened, and the attempt to open your eyes never really entirely works. That's shown in the Odyssey and in the Garden of Eden story and in the movie itself.